Hello and welcome to today's class on understanding geography with diagrams. Today we'll be talking about the limits to growth model. Now let us understand what was this limits to growth model. The limits to growth model is otherwise also called as the neo-Malthusian model. The phrase limits to growth was popularized by the Club of Rome report of 1972. This limits to growth model objective was to analyze the Malthus theory. We had already talked about Malthus theory in our population geography first class itself. Now, this limits to growth was nothing but the means a computer-based model which was developed by your Club of Rome to analyze your Malthus theory. It was basically in the form of a projection. What are the assumptions? Assumptions it has, number one is that there is finite amount of renewable and non-renewable energy. Again, there is finite amount of the arable land, means cultivable land, and the capacity of the cultivable land for the food production. Again, there is finite capacity of environment to absorb the pollution, or we can say the forests or the other sources of the green sinks, they have the limited capacity to absorb the pollution. Next, it again says another assumption is that there is an exponential population growth. The next assumption is that it takes technological changes are built into the model provided that there is money for them. It says that though technical changes are available and provided, but there should be money to sustain such technological change. Now, the Club of Rome in this very context, now basically you would be asking what's a Club of Rome? Club of Rome is nothing but an environmental organization. Now, the Club of Rome developed the model based on the five variables. What are these five variables? The growth of the world population, growth of food, industrialization, resource depletion, and pollution. You can see this over here, the diagram. It takes into account your resources, pollution, population, pollution, resources, industrial output, and last but not least, your food per capita. These are the five variables that have been taken into account. As you can see, the resource base is depleting. And again, if you look into the population the pollution, it is increasing. And then if you look at the food per capita, it grows up to a certain level, but after that it starts falling. Similar can be considered with the case of the industrial output. It grows up to a certain limit and then it starts decreasing. And last but not least, we have your population. The population which keeps on increasing up to a certain points and again it decreases. But you can see that with the simultaneous decrease of population, there is decrease in but prior to that there is decrease in the the food per capita. It shows that that food per capita will decline when the population is high. You do not need to write any of this, but you need to understand this from this diagram itself. Next. Now, the Club of Rome developed this model based on the five variables that we had discussed. Now, about these five factors. Now, the five factors were highly interdependent, and that changes to a single factor often merely shed the problems on other. For example, see, if the population increases, then what will happen? Obviously, the pollution will increase, the food per capita will decrease, the industrial output might increase, may not increase, but indirectly it will affect everything. Next, these variables are considered to grow exponentially, means they will grow continuously and at a high rate, while the ability of technology to increase the resources availability is linear, or I can say limited. Simple. It says that all these five variables will grow at a very increasing rate, but again the technological capacity to increase the resource availability will be only linear or limited. Next, the technological innovation to modify or deal with the consequences of growth in each of the factor, they concluded, could slow but not halt the crisis. See, two things that it is talking about the technology. First of all, the technology is limited when we consider with respect to all the five variables. Now the population is increasing, but the technological capacity to reduce the population is not that great. Similarly, the pollution is increasing, but nowadays you would see that the green technology, that is only limited with the developed countries like the USA, Germany, France, and they are using them at an extensive rate. But such technology is not available with the developing or the least developed nation. As a result, the pollution is high. Next, what is the standard run? Standard run means nothing but your the first experimentation, or the first that is the first when it was made applicable. The standard run, it shows that assume that there is continuous growth trends in all the factors, means all the factors are continuously growing, and thus exponential growth in all the variables lead to the overshoot and collapse of the system. It's simple that all these five factors are growing, and this will lead to eventually collapse in the system. It gives the following example in this context. It says high level of industrialization, what will happen? Resource will deplete, and this resource depletion will do what? There will be diversion of capital. Remember that one of the factors of production is capital. Capital, simply I can describe it as money. So diversion of the capital for the search of the resources. Next, depletion of the capital for the industry. This will lead to collapse of the industry and services and agricultural sector, and this will lead to the lack of food for the food and poor healthcare services, and ultimately this will result in your population decline. This is the entire theory of your limits to growth. But this limits to growth was highly criticized. What were the factors for criticism? Let's look into it. See, the first factor, the first point is that it treats the whole world as a single unit. See, the whole world is not a single unit. In the world also, we can divide the entire country nations into the developed, least developed, and the developing nations. Next, again, is that the large multivariated subsystems have lumped together into a single system. What does it mean? See, we have the various forms of non-renewable energy resources, but there could be some energy resources which would be exhausted faster than compared to other energy resources in the non-renewable category. Now what they did was that they combined the whole non-renewable energy resources available into a single category and said that the entire non-renewable energy resources will deplete at a simultaneous rate. Now this was something that was unjustified. Next, the population growth and food production resource depletion, industrial growth, and the level of pollution were estimated from the existing knowledge. See, they could not predict that what will happen in the future. They did what they had on the limited knowledge they had. See, please understand this. In 1972, the report was published, and during the 1972, the technological capacity, the other forms of capacity to control the pollution and population were very limited. For example, recently we have developed the BS6 model, which is applicable in the entire whole of India. Now that could contain the population at a greater level. Similarly, we are continuously developing our solar mission. That is, we have to achieve by 100 gigawatts by 2022. Now, now these are all the technological capacity that was completely underestimated, or we can say that that such knowledge were not available during that time, and hence whatever the estimation they made it only with the limited knowledge that was available during the time of 1972. Next, it does not take into consideration the dynamics of resources. What is the dynamics of resources? The dynamics of resources can be simply explained by resources are not, they become. This was given by Zimmerman. He says that we have resources because we know that this resources is applicable for such and such purpose. Until and unless a resources is applicable, there is no point in calling any material as a resource. Similarly, he said that there can be alternative resources. So in this context, what I want to say is that resources are not, they become, means that resources will not become extinct, or resources will not be exhausted. Resources can shift, new forms of resources also can be developed. Next, it predicted the crisis by 2100. See, report was published in 1972, but it says that the entire crisis will come in 2100. But this same thing was negated by who? None other than the Club of Rome itself. The Club of Rome said that yes, pollution, increasing population will have adverse effect on the environment and on the people, but that doesn't mean that it is going to happen in the next in the 2100 or by 2100. Again, this model was essentially pessimistic, or I can also call it as the deterministic. What is deterministic? Deterministic or the pessimistic models, basically what they do is that they do not take into consideration the human capacity, or even if they are taking consideration of the human capacity, but they say that the human capacity is limited when we compare it to the environmental dictates. For example, earthquake, human capacity to predict earthquake is limited, but again human capacity to build back or to restructure or to build back their infrastructure is quite high. Next, the model is the simplified version of reality, means which picks up particular features and ignores others in order to create a manageable base. So we can basically see that the model has highly simplified the thing. It did not take into account the complex variables and other things that could have actually give the model a practical approach. Hence, the model was simplified. Now, how the model was simplified? Just look into this number 10 point. See, some of the important variables were not included. For example, changing behavior of the consumer with respect to pricing. Understand this. See, if the price of a product increases, obviously the demand of that product will decrease. Now, let us say the iPhone today becomes 2 lakh. Obviously, the purchasing capacity of iPhone at the rate of 2 lakh is not available with every person. But purchasing capacity of the iPhone with 50,000 will be available with other person. So this is what it is trying to say. It's not, see, when what will happen is that if the resources start becoming scarce, then what will happen is that the price of the resources will increase. Hence the population will do, they will try to change in, they will try to get into some other form of resources which is cheap. So this is something that this limits to growth model never added into it. Next, again the model was based on limited data. Yes, in 1972 the data was very limited. Again, the model analyzes global average in an aggregative way and is insensitive to the regional differences of the less developed country. See, it totally considers that the developing country are all together, they will face the same problem, but it does not takes into account the regional differences of the less developed country. That is, within the less developed countries also there are regional differences. Within the less developed countries, some are more capable and some are less capable. Let us say the sub-Saharan Africa. I want you to find the Sahel region. Use the Google to find this. Now, in the sub-Saharan Africa or in the Sahel region, what happens is that they are less capable when compared with the other regions such as Nigeria, Tunisia. These are the more capable regions, even within the less developed countries. Next, what are the positive points of the limits to growth model? The first and foremost positive point was that it forced us to look into the direction in which we seem to head. Means it actually brought into account that the excessive population and the pollution that is taking place. It brought it into the awareness of the globe. Next, it nailed down the fact that exponential growth is abnormal in a finite system. Yes, within a finite system, exponential growth cannot happen, and the exponential growth will lead to disaster. Every living thing reaches a limit and beyond which it cannot grow. Now, whatever happened is that the above criticism prompted the Club of Rome to sponsor the formulation of another computer model about carrying capacity of the Earth system. Now, this was called limits to growth revised or beyond the limit. Now, what was this actually? This the new model that they developed. See, it says that it does not foresee a dire future. A dire future means a dangerous future that the limits to growth sees. It advocates cautious journey where waste is punished and moderation is rewarded. It simply says that if you waste the environment or if you waste the environmental resources, then it will lead to penalty or the punishment. Basically, you can see that we have adopted this. We have the CPCB, we have the State Pollution Control Board. These are the bodies which have been formulated or which have been established so as to reduce the environmental pollution or to put a check on the environmental pollution. How? They will reward those who are adopting better technologies as well as punish those who are polluting the environment. What was the conclusion? It said that Human use of many essential resources and generation of several pollutants have passed the sustainable rates. This is the one thing. Again, it says that unless there is a meaningful reduction in the resources and energy flow, the world faces a sharp decline in the food output, energy use, and the industrial production. It simply says that unless there is a meaningful reduction, it says that we have to reduce. But it, unlike the limits to growth, what it said that we have to reduce, else we are going to face a dire consequences in 2100. It doesn't say that. It says that we have to limit or we have to reduce our consumption, but at what rate or at what determined time, it doesn't say so. Next, to avoid this decline, growth in resource consumption and population must be eased down at the same time as there is a rapid increase in the efficiency of resources and energy use. It says that to avoid the decline of the growth in resources, consumption and population must be eased down. It's simple and you can understand it. At the same time, there is a rapid increase in the efficiency of resource and energy use. A sustainable society is technically and economically possible. It says that as there is a rapid increase in the efficiency of the resource and energy use, a sustainable society is technically and economically possible. Please refer to the word efficiency of resource use. What is efficiency of resource use? Means the optimal use of the resources and the proper use of resources. And only with that, or we can simply say that with the proper use of resources, we can achieve a sustainable society. It's simple. I hope you got a clarity of what limit to growth is and what limit to growth revises. See, if it is for a 20 markers question, I would like you to limit your answer up to the limit of growth. But consider this as a 60 markers question. Then I would like you to not only just write the limits to growth, but also write this, that is limits to growth revise and beyond the limits. As well as what we can do is that the assumption part I have written it over here. You can pause the video and you can also write the assumption part in case it is a 60 markers question without drawing the diagram. I hope you have a conceptual clarity of this. Thank you. That will be all.